Hey investor friends, I'm Michelle Markey, and today I'm going to talk about my thoughts and experiences with Danielle and Phil Town's Invested book with the February Knowing Your Number chapter. And this book has so many lessons and there's so much to say, and I like how Danielle introduces the concept of a stock market and how it had its origins with the Dutch, and specifically something like the Dutch East India Company, where it became the first publicly traded company whose company stock could be traded. And back then there was just a lot of speculation about whether ships would come back from India. And I like how Danielle talked about it was like probably a bunch of guys sitting around in a bar gambling and speculating as to whether the ships would come back. I liken this to McSorley's, where we could sit around having our pale ale beers, or in the case of the Dutch, probably India pale ales. If you're also on the journey towards financial independence and the ability to retire early, or also known as FIRE, I'd love if you could please like and subscribe, because in this video I'm going to talk about what it really would take to get there. Thanks. I'm sure many of us daydream about what we would do if we didn't have to work anymore, and I take that a step further in Googling how much money would I need in order to quit my job. And the articles I came across recommend a somewhat short-term approach. They talk about if you want to quit your job, that you should have maybe 6 months of living expenses or $30,000 saved up. But that's not very practical if you want to think about your long term. If you quit at age 30 and expect to live to age 90, you're going to need a little bit more of a plan than just doing some of these short-term types of actions that you're left with not enough money. And I came across a Mr. Money Mustache article that I found to be helpful, in that he showed if you were to have $500,000 saved up and you didn't really earn that much on it, like average stock market and dividend returns on that $500,000, how many years you could live before you ran out. And that was another useful step headed towards the right direction. But I find that it's most useful to think about what number we're going to need in the context of how Danielle and Phil talked about it. I know we're all very busy living life, and I want to share some stark and compelling reasons why we should try to get up from being couch potatoes and get to learning how to invest. Because Phil Town mentions how baby boomers around his age may have only $500,000 saved up, and that's not going to be enough if they're 65 today and living for another 30 years. And another fact that could be a little bit alarming is if you check out the latest on Social Security, it may not be funded enough by the year 2035 to be able to give people ongoing full payments from Social Security like people enjoy today. And by 2035, people may only get 75% of the original owed amount that they would at the age of eligibility at that time. So it's a little bit scary to think about how if we don't try to invest for ourselves, then we may not have much of a governmental safety net left over by the time it's the millennials' turn to retire. I can tell you that I've met a lot of grandmas in retail stores, and I can tell that they're not working there because they enjoy doing it. They're there because they have to work. So I know that I don't want to have to be working in retail when my teeth are falling out, and I'm sure you don't either. And another idea that's not so fun that they talk about in the book is the idea of abdicating our investing responsibility to the professionals or financial advisors and investors who are paid to do this kind of work. And there are several problems with abdicating it to these professionals. Number one, they charge significant fees in percentage points that could make the difference between only having $1 million when you retire and having several millions of dollars when you retire. It can make that big of a difference. And another issue is that they usually only take people who have net worth of at least $250,000 or $500,000. And in order to be considered for some investment opportunities with some professionals, sometimes you need to be an accredited investor of having a net worth of $1 million or more, or making an average $200,000 per year for several years before you're considered an accredited investor, at which point you might have the privilege of being able to invest in venture capital, angel investments, and other kinds of complex investing instruments that the SEC thinks that only sophisticated investors with enough money are allowed to be investing in. And those are some warning signs to think about. And the other thing that I worry about is if you were to allow or pay for the privilege of these professionals to invest your money, a lot of them, such as hedge funds, take off 2 and 20, where that means that they take 2% of assets under management and they take 20% of the profits. So you're not even sure if you'll really get enough of return out of that kind of arrangement. And you're basically letting other people invest your money and you don't know if it's really going to pay off in the end. So because of these problems, I'd rather invest my money based on the strength of my own investing knowledge. Another factor that makes a difference between having $1 million or several millions of dollars when you retire is the rate of return you're able to generate on your investments. So normally I like the number 7, such as in playing rugby sevens, there are 7 players to a side and we play for 7-minute halves. It's a good time, but not when it comes to the stock market. When it comes to investing, we're better off aiming for rugby union rules, or where there's 15 players to a side. And in this analogy, I'm talking about aiming for 15% of returns. It can make such a huge difference, such that you don't have to retire at age 70 with $1 million. You could be retiring several decades before that with many millions of dollars. To figure out your number, which is the amount of money you need to have saved up before you can quit your job and retire, is to calculate 4 numbers. And this includes our average annual spending amount, a starting amount with which to invest, how many years we have to invest, and our expected rate of return on our investments. And based on some of the calculations I've done using websites like Rule 1 Investing or danielletown.com, I've tried to play around with different numbers to get to what I think I might need. So on the lower end of my lifestyle cost, I might need to make $1 million before I can retire. Or on the more expensive lifestyle cost I estimate for myself, I would need to probably have $3 million before I could retire. And then I'd continue investing those sums respectively. So those are just some examples, but I encourage you to calculate on your own. Phil Town talks about the number 26% being pretty magical. And this is basically the holy grail of an investment return if we can achieve that, such that let's say you have $500,000 to start with in investing. If you multiply that at 26%, you would double that 500K into $1 million in only 3 years. So I think that's a pretty cool example and something that we should all strive for, but not to necessarily expect that we'll get that lucky. But if we are, hey, all the better. Much like Phil Town, I could spend hours playing around in spreadsheets because I love using spreadsheets to calculate just about anything. And one example I figured I'd try to experiment with is taking the invested books examples of, let's say you start out with $40,000 with which to invest, you contribute $15,000 a year to it, and you expect a return of 15% per year. And I tried to see if starting at age 30, how many years it would take to reach $1 million, at which point you wouldn't have to work at a job anymore. And in that way, I tried to see what the impact of inflation might be on both our lifestyle cost and also our buying power. So I tried to account for that at 3% and subtracted that amount when it came to how much we had in our current revolving balance per year as to money after our lifestyle cost took some of that money out. And then also, if you also look at how much you would need to make at a job and a lifestyle cost that's around $30,000 to start with in today's dollars, and after working at a job for X amount of years, at what point you would be able to not have to work at that job. So I decided to base that on about a $70,000 gross salary job where if you account for about 34% in taxes, health insurance, and so on, you might be left with a net of about $50,000, out of which to take out your contributions to your yearly investment amount, as well as to afford your lifestyle cost. And keep in mind that this is going up every year at 3%. So with those numbers, I also determined that this person starting to invest at age 30 could potentially achieve $1 million by age 47, and then they retire, and let's say they're not working anymore after those years. They can then just continue to invest what they built at about $1 million at 15% a year, to eventually end up at the age of 90 with $50 million or so. And that's the same age as Warren Buffett. So I find that to be pretty cool if people are able to retire much sooner than the common number up in the 60s or 70s. In the book, Danielle and Phil have a conversation about the 4 levels of mastery. And this is also known as circles of competence, or as I introduced in my very first YouTube video, a knowledge matrix. And this Warren Buffett type of concept involves our knowledge and understanding of companies and industries, or also our ability to do things in general. And you can also think of it as, if something is too hard, it's outside of your circle of competence. And for example, I'm unconsciously incompetent at scuba diving, or I'm unconsciously competent at lifting weights that I never knew I could lift, and I'm consciously incompetent with cryptocurrencies, but I'm consciously competent at drop kicking 5 rugby balls across the upright goalpost. And this kind of prowess is something I'd like to be able to bring to investing too. In this February chapter, I interpret what Phil is saying when he says to begin now is that he means we should learn as much as we can about how to invest. And if we're really itching to just buy something in the stock market so we can know what it feels like, maybe we then buy a practice share, as Danielle Town has done, so that we have skin in the game, and then it motivates us to evaluate the companies even more and pay attention to their progress. And then when the market decides to offer it at a price that we'd like to buy it at, then we can invest in it for the long term. Lastly, Danielle encourages us to practice maro, or thankfulness, especially for our problems, because we wouldn't be who we are without them. And I'm thankful for my cold house with insulation issues, because it's made me learn to bundle up in fluffy clothes, and I hope that this struggle will build my character. And if you enjoyed this video or learned something, please like and subscribe. And I'd love to hear from you about if you figured out your number and what your thoughts were on this book and chapter. And I wish you well on your journey towards financial freedom. Till next time.